Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty thought-provoking, the idea of a basic income.
Okay.
You sent us a whole stack of articles and research on it.
Yeah.
Exploring the concept, the arguments for and against, even real-world trials.
Yeah. Some really fascinating stuff in here.
It seems like you really want to get to, get past the hype.
Right.
And really understand the nitty-gritty, like what IS, basic income, why is everyone talking about it, and does it actually hold up when you look at all the details?
Exactly.
That's what we're here to do today.
It's a topic that's gained a lot of attention recently.
So let's start with the basics. It's not just free money.
Right. It's much more nuanced than that.
Okay.
You've got articles here that really nail down the key features. It's about regular payments, usually envisioned as a monthly sum going straight to individuals, not households.
Yeah, got it.
And everyone gets it. Universal, no matter your income or job status. And the biggest thing, no strings attached. It's unconditional.
Okay, that unconditional part.
Right.
That's where things get.
Yeah, it really sets it apart from, say, traditional welfare, which often has a lot of conditions, like having to prove you're looking for work or falling below a certain income level.
One of the articles you sent even calls basic income a social dividend.
That's a really interesting way to frame it, isn't it? Instead of a handout, it becomes like a return on investment, a share of the wealth that we've all contributed to as a society.
Like we all deserve a slice of the pie, so to speak. Makes you wonder why that framing isn't used more often.
It could be about making it more politically palatable.
Right.
You know, some people are inherently wary of the term basic income itself.
Okay, so you've got arguments in here about basic income being about justice, freedom, ADD security.
Yeah.
Let's start with the justice angle.
Okay.
One article even talks about this town, Middlesbrough, in England.
Middlesbrough is a great example of what they call intergenerational social justice.
Okay.
You see, the town built its wealth on generations of iron and steel workers, but as industries changed, Middlesbrough suffered.
Right.
The idea is that a basic income could be a way to acknowledge the contributions of those past generations and create a fair starting point for everyone today.
So basically acknowledging that the wealth we benefit from isn't just about individual effort. It's built on the backs of those who came before us.
Exactly. And research backs this up. There's a strong public desire for a floor income to ensure that everyone's basic needs are met, which is a core principle of basic income.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the freedom
argument? That always feels a bit trickier to me.
Well, you have sources here that look at it from both libertarian and Republican perspectives.
Okay.
Libertarians, especially those like Charles Murray, see the traditional welfare system as limiting individual freedom.
Okay.
They view basic income as a less intrusive way to empower people to make their own choices without excessive government control.
It's about individual agency.
Exactly. But then you get into the concept of libertarian paternalism.
Oh, interesting.
Which is fascinating. It's the idea that even while promoting choice, we can be nudged towards certain decisions.
Okay.
Think about how some pension schemes automatically enroll you.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to actively opt OUT if you don't want it.
It makes you think about all those default settings we encounter every day.
It's nudge theory in action.
Right.
And it's not always bad, but it does raise questions about how much our choices are being steered, even subtly. So where does the Republican view of freedom come in?
They focus on non-domination.
Okay.
It's not just about the government not interfering right now, but also not having the power to arbitrarily interfere in the future.
Right.
Basic income, they argue, gives you that economic security to resist coercion.
Okay.
You're less likely to be trapped in bad jobs or relationships just because you need the money.
So it's giving people the power to say no.
Exactly. And that power opens up possibilities pursuing creative work, starting a family without being solely focused on finances, even just taking time for leisure and reflection.
Yeah.
Things that are often luxuries when you're constantly worried about making ends meet.
Okay, I can see how basic income would play into the security argument as well.
Absolutely.
Especially in today's economy.
One of your articles talks about the rise of precariat.
Oh, right.
People stuck in insecure, unstable work with no safety net.
Yeah.
Basic income is seen as a way to address that.
Yeah.
To provide a buffer against the constant churn of the modern job market.
It's like acknowledging that the old model of a stable job for life is gone for many people.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing poverty either.
Right.
You have research here on deaths of despair, suicides, drug overdoses, things linked to economic hopelessness. A basic income, by providing that foundational security, could potentially help prevent those tragedies.
Okay, so there are some compelling arguments for basic income in terms of justice, freedom, and security. But let's be real, the big question on everyone's mind is, can we afford it?
That's the question that always comes up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can we afford it? But your sources actually do a great job of breaking down that concern. They argue that the we can't afford it argument often relies on outdated thinking.
So it's more about reimagining how our current
systems work, maybe even finding new sources of funding.
Exactly. One article goes into detail about how we could achieve tax neutrality, meaning no overall tax increase, by adjusting brackets and closing loopholes that primarily benefit the wealthy.
Right.
It also talks about redirecting funds from existing welfare programs, especially those that are bureaucratic and inefficient.
So basically streamlining the safety net and cutting out the administrative bloat.
Exactly. And then there are the more outside-the-box ideas, things like sovereign wealth funds inspired by the Alaska Permanent Fund, or even implementing carbon taxes or taxing economic rents.
The Alaska Permanent Fund. That's the one where every resident gets a yearly dividend from the state's oil revenue. Right?
That's right. And what's really compelling is that the sources suggest basic income could actually stimulate the economy.
Think more entrepreneurship, less reliance on traditional welfare, even reduced crime. They even cite examples from the pilot program in India.
So it's not just a drain on resources. It could actually be an investment that generates a return. That's a pretty powerful counterargument.
It is.
But what about the impact on work?
That's another big one, right? Would people just stop working if they knew they had a guaranteed income?
It's a worry a lot of people have, for sure.
And it's understandable. But the evidence from trials and studies actually suggests it's a lot more complicated than that.
One of the articles I sent you actually uses the term debunk. When talking about the idea that everyone would just become lazy.
Exactly. And they back it up with research showing the effects on labor supply are usually minimal. In fact, some argue we're focusing on the wrong kind of work. Basic income could actually free people up to engage in unpaid but valuable activities. Like caregiving, creative pursuits, or community work. Things our society needs but often undervalues.
It's like expanding our definition of what work even means.
Right. And one article even brought up this ancient Greek concept of skol, which basically means reflective idleness. They argue that leisure time is crucial for personal growth, creativity, even just recharging so we can contribute better when we are working.
So maybe instead of fearing idleness, we should embrace it as part of the healthy balance.
No, we've spent a good amount of time exploring arguments for basic income. But your sources also discuss some alternatives. Things like a higher minimum wage, expanding social insurance, workfare programs, tax credits, the list goes on.
So are those just bad ideas then?
Not necessarily, but the articles you've selected really dig into why these alternatives might not be as effective, especially when you consider those principles we talked about earlier, justice, freedom, security. Take the minimum wage, for example. While it can help those who are employed, it doesn't do much for people who can't work or who can't find jobs in this ever-changing economy. It also doesn't address the deeper issue of feeling trapped by circumstances, that lack of real freedom to say no.
So a minimum wage is a good start, but maybe not the whole solution.
Exactly. You even sent an article about the UK's universal credit program.
Oh, yeah.
Which was meant to simplify the welfare system.
Yeah, that one was a bit of a train wreck, wasn't it?
It highlights the pitfalls of these complex, means-tested programs that can become bureaucratic nightmares, create poverty traps, and even end up harming the very people they're meant to help.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the theory and the arguments.
Right.
But I'm really curious about what happens when basic income is actually put into practice. What do we learn from real-world trials?
That's where things get really interesting. Your sources are packed with insights from basic income pilots all over the globe. Canada, Namibia, India, Finland.
Wow.
Even some crowd-funded projects. Each one offers a unique glimpse into what this could look like in action.
So like little windows into possible futures.
Exactly. Take the Mincome experiment in Canada.
Okay.
It ran for a few years back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the results were remarkable. People were healthier, fewer hospital visits, fewer accidents, even improvements in mental health.
Interesting.
Kids, and especially boys, were less likely to drop out of school.
Okay.
And it seemed to create a stronger sense of community, less of that stigma that often comes with needing help.
Wow, so it really did have a positive impact on the whole community.
It did.
What about those pilots in Namibia and India?
Those were fascinating because they were in developing countries.
Right.
In Namibia, the basic income significantly reduced poverty and improved child nutrition. But it also empowered people. They felt more in control of their lives, started businesses, and invested in their communities.
That's amazing. What happened in India?
The Indian pilots had similar outcomes. Less debt, more investment in things like education and healthcare, and a greater sense of agency for the participants. It's particularly interesting to see how basic income can impact women in these settings. They often reported feeling more empowered and respected within their families and communities.
It's like basic income isn't just about money. It's about changing power dynamics and creating more opportunity.
Exactly. And these are just a few examples. You also have information on those more recent experiments in Finland and Ontario.
Right.
These are still ongoing, but they show that this movement is gaining momentum. Even crowd-funded projects are popping up, a sign that people are eager to try this out.
So it's not just a fringe idea anymore. It's moving into the mainstream.
Absolutely. But before we get too carried away, it's important to remember that basic income isn't a magic bullet.
Right.
Your sources are pretty clear about that. It has its critics, and they raise some valid concerns.
Okay, so what are some of the key criticisms?
One of the biggest ones is that it would disincentivize work.
Right.
Critics argue that if people are guaranteed a basic income, they'll just stop working, leading to a decline in productivity and economic growth.
It's that classic, why bother working if you don't have to argument.
Exactly. But the proponents push back on that, citing all those studies we talked about earlier. Remember, most of them showed little to no effect on overall work hours.
So it's not like everyone suddenly decided to quit their jobs.
Right. And there are a few reasons for that.
Okay.
First, even with a basic income, most people still want to earn more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To improve their lives, pursue their passions, have more security. Basic income provides a floor, not a ceiling. Second, people actually get a lot out of work.
Right.
A sense of purpose, social connection, identity. Basic income doesn't take that away. In fact, it might allow people to find work that's more meaningful and fulfilling, rather than just being stuck in a job they hate because they need the paycheck.
It's about choice and opportunity, not just survival.
Exactly. And third, it could even shift the power dynamics in the labor market. Imagine you're negotiating for a raise or better working conditions. Knowing you have a basic income to fall back on gives you a lot more leverage.
Suddenly those take-it-or-leave-it job offers don't hold the same weight.
Exactly. Now, another major criticism is, of course, the cost.
Yeah, that's the big one. How are we going to pay for this?
Right. Critics argue it would be incredibly expensive, requiring massive tax hikes or cuts to other essential services. But again, the proponents offer counter-arguments. They point out that affordability depends on how it's implemented. Yeah. Things like adjusting tax brackets, closing loopholes, redirecting funds from less effective programs, even finding new revenue sources like carbon taxes or land value taxes.
So it's not necessarily about taking money away from other things. It's about smarter budgeting and maybe tapping into resources we haven't fully utilized.
Exactly. And don't forget those potential dynamic effects on the economy we talked about earlier.
Right.
Basic income could boost entrepreneurship, reduce reliance on traditional welfare, even improve health outcomes, leading to lower healthcare costs.
Right.
All of that could offset some of the upfront expenses.
Okay, so it's a complex equation, not just a simple basic income equals more taxes situation.
Right. And some proponents even argue that in the long run, basic income could actually save money by addressing the root causes of costly social problems like poverty, homelessness, and crime. Studies have shown that cash transfer programs can have a significant impact on all of those.
Like preventative health care for society. Addressing the problems at the source could be more cost-effective in the long run?
It could.
But what about the social and cultural impacts? I've heard people say basic income could create a culture of dependency and undermine the work ethic.
That's a common concern.
Right.
People worry that if you give everyone money for nothing, they'll just sit around and become lazy.
It's almost like we've been conditioned to believe that a certain level of struggle
it's a deeply ingrained idea.
It's necessary for people to be productive.
For sure. But again, proponents point to the evidence.
Right.
Those basic income trials we discussed earlier, they consistently show that people don't just stop working. They often use the extra security to pursue their passions, start businesses, care for their families, or contribute to their communities in new ways.
So it's not about eliminating work. It's about changing the relationship we have with it.
Right. And it could even strengthen the work ethic by giving people the freedom to pursue work that's truly meaningful to them rather than just being driven by necessity.
Imagine a world where people are excited to go to work because they're doing something
exactly. Now, another criticism is that basic income would be unfair, rewarding those who don't work as much as those who do.
It's that something for nothing argument. Like it violates some fundamental sense of fairness.
But proponents argue that this view ignores the contributions of those who aren't engaged in traditional paid labor.
Right.
Think stay-at-home parents, caregivers, students, artists, volunteers. They all create value for society, even if it's not always measured in dollars and cents.
It's about recognizing all the different ways people contribute, not just the ones that fit neatly into our economic system.
Exactly. And they also point out that basic income could actually make society fair by reducing poverty, inequality, and the stigma of needing help.
It's about leveling the playing field so everyone has a chance to succeed.
Right. Now, some critics also worry about practical issues, like fraud and abuse. They imagine people trying to game the system, claiming the basic income while still working under the table or something.
I guess it's a valid concern. Any system can be exploited if people are determined enough.
But proponents argue that the potential for fraud can be minimized through careful design and implementation. Basic income is actually simpler to administer than traditional welfare programs, which often involve complex means testing and a lot of bureaucratic oversight. And using modern technology like digital ID and payment systems could make it even harder to cheat.
So technology could actually be a solution in this case.
Exactly. And they also point out that even if there is some fraud, the overall benefits of basic income, things like reduced poverty, improved health, and increased economic activity, are likely to far outweigh the costs.
It's about weighing the potential risks against the potential rewards.
Exactly. And finally, there's this concern that basic income could actually undermine the political will to address other social problems.
So the fear is that if people have a basic income,
that's the worry.
They'll become complacent and stop pushing for things like universal health care or affordable housing.
But proponents suggest the opposite could happen. They argue that when people feel more secure, they're actually more likely to be politically engaged and push for positive change. Plus, basic income could free up resources that are currently wasted on inefficient programs, allowing governments to invest more in essential services.
So it's not an either the situation. It could actually be a catalyst.
Exactly.
For even more progress.
Exactly. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here. The arguments for and against the potential benefits, the challenges, the different perspectives. But one of the most valuable things about the sources you've shared is that they don't just stay in the realm of theory. They delve into the real-world experiences of people who have actually participated in basic income programs.
Right.
And those stories are truly fascinating.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear what people actually say about living with a basic income.
That's where the human side of this whole debate really comes to life.
So let's hear some of those stories. What kind of impact did basic income have on people's lives?
What the most common themes you see in these accounts is a sense of empowerment.
Okay.
Participants consistently report feeling more in control of their lives, less stressed about money, and more confident in their ability to make choices that align with their values.
It's like that feeling of having a safety net allows them to breathe a little easier.
Yeah.
To focus on things beyond just making ends meet.
Exactly. And this plays out in different ways. Some people use the basic income to invest in their education or training, opening up new career paths. Others use it to improve their health, maybe finally being able to afford that dental work they've been putting off, or just having the mental space to prioritize their well-being.
One of the articles mentions a single mother from the income experiment who was finally able to afford healthy food for her kids and enroll them in after-school activities.
Wow.
She even said she felt like she was actually living for the first time in years, not just surviving.
That's a powerful example of how basic income can make a tangible difference in people's day-to-day lives. It's not just about preventing extreme poverty. It's about creating a space for people to thrive.
What about those pilots in Namibia and India? Did those stories reflect similar themes?
Absolutely. In Namibia, there's this story of an elderly woman who had been living in poverty, relying on the kindness of others. When she started receiving the basic income, she talked about how it gave her back her dignity and self-respect.
Wow.
She was able to buy her own food and clothes, contribute to her community, even help out her grandchildren.
Okay.
It made her feel like a valued member of society, not a burden.
It's like that basic income allowed her to reclaim her agency.
Exactly.
To participate in her community on her own terms.
And in India, you see similar stories of people using the basic income to pay off debts, invest in their children's education, and just generally feel more in control of their futures. It's particularly striking to hear how it impacted women, many of whom reported feeling more empowered and respected within their families and communities.
So these stories really highlight the human side of basic income.
They do.
It's not just about numbers and economic theories. It's about real people's lives being transformed.
Well, and those individual stories actually reflect the larger trends that emerge from the research. Study after study shows that basic income programs can lead to improvements in health, reductions in poverty and crime, increases in education levels, and a greater sense of overall well-being. It's not a cure-all, but it has the potential to create a ripple effect of positive change.
It seems like the evidence is pretty compelling.
It is.
But you mentioned earlier that basic income has its critics. What are some of the key concerns they raise and how to...
Well, one of the most persistent criticisms is that it would disincentivize work, leading to a decline in productivity and economic growth. Critics worry that if people are guaranteed a basic income, they'll just stop working altogether.
It's that... age-old fear of the welfare queen. That's the idea that people will become lazy and dependent if they don't have to work for their money.
But proponents of basic income argue that this fear is largely unfounded. They point to all those studies we discussed earlier, the ones that show minimal to no effect on overall work hours. They argue that people are inherently driven to create, to contribute, to improve their lives. A basic income doesn't take that away. It just changes the context.
So it's not about eliminating work. It's about redefining our relationship with it.
And proponents also point out that most people would still want to earn more than a basic income to achieve their goals and aspirations. Basic income provides a floor, not a ceiling.
It takes the pressure off, allowing people to pursue work that is more meaningful and fulfilling, or to take time for things like education, caregiving, or creative pursuits.
Exactly. And then there's the economic argument. critics worry that basic income would be incredibly expensive,
Yeah.
leading to massive tax hikes or cuts to other essential services.
Yeah, that's a big concern for a lot of people. How do proponents address that?
They argue that the affordability depends largely on how it's implemented.
Okay.
It's not just about giving everyone a check. It's about rethinking our entire system of taxation and social spending. Things like adjusting tax brackets, closing loopholes, redirecting funds from less effective programs, and exploring new revenue sources like carbon taxes or land value taxes.
It's like a complete overhaul of how we think about public finances.
Exactly. And proponents also highlight those potential dynamic effects.
Right.
We discussed earlier the possibility that basic income could actually stimulate the economy, leading to more jobs, less reliance on traditional fare, even lower healthcare costs.
It's like investing in people's potential. Exactly, not just giving them a handout.
Exactly. And some proponents even argue that in the long run, basic income could actually save me money by preventing costly social problems like poverty, homelessness, and crime. There's research showing that cash transfer programs can have a significant impact on reducing all of those things.
It's like a preventative approach to social problems, addressing the root causes rather than just reacting to the symptoms.
Now, another concern that critics often raise is that basic income would be unfair to those who work hard.
Okay.
They see it as rewarding those who don't work as much, creating a sense of entitlement.
It's that something for nothing argument again.
Exactly. But proponents of basic income push back on that, arguing that everyone in society benefits from the collective efforts of others, even those who aren't engaged in traditional paid labor. They point to stay-at-home parents, caregivers, students, artists, volunteers, all those people who contribute to society in ways that aren't always reflected in economic metrics.
It's about recognizing the value of all forms of work, not just the ones that generate a paycheck.
Exactly. And proponents also argue that basic income could actually make society fairer by reducing poverty and inequality. It's about creating a more level playing field where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Okay, so we've talked about the economic and social arguments, but what about the practical challenges of implementing basic income? Critics often raise concerns about things like fraud and abuse or the potential for administrative nightmares.
Those are valid concerns, and proponents acknowledge them. But they also argue that these challenges can be overcome through careful design and implementation. For instance, basic income is actually simpler to administer than traditional welfare programs, which often involve complex means testing and bureaucratic hurdles. And leveraging technology like digital ID and payment systems could make it even harder for people to cheat.
So technology could actually be a key to success in this case.
Absolutely. And while there's always a risk of fraud in any system, proponents argue that the potential benefits of basic income far outweigh the risks.
It's about looking at the big picture, not just focusing on the potential downsides.
And finally, there's this concern that basic income could undermine the political will to address other social problems.
So the fear is that if people have a basic income, they'll become
That's a worry.
complacent and stop pushing for things like universal health care or affordable housing.
But proponents suggest the opposite might happen. They argue that when people have their basic needs met, they're actually more likely to be politically engaged and push for positive social change. They also point out that basic income could free up resources that are currently wasted on inefficient programs, allowing governments to invest more in essential services.
So it's not an either situation. Basic income could actually be a stepping stone towards a more comprehensive and effective welfare state.
Exactly. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here today.
Yeah, we have.
The arguments for and against basic income, the real-world experiments, the personal stories, the potential benefits and challenges. It's clear that this is a complex and multifaceted issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. And I appreciate you breaking it all down for me.
Of course. But before we wrap up, I want to emphasize one thing. Basic income isn't just an abstract policy debate. It's about real people's lives.
It's about that single mother who can finally feed her kids healthy food. Or that elderly woman who regains her dignity. Or that young entrepreneur who finally has the security to pursue their dreams.
Exactly. And as we continue to explore the possibilities and challenges of basic income, it's crucial to keep those human stories at the forefront of our minds.
Well said. And as we move into a future that's increasingly uncertain, it's clear that we need to be open to new ideas and innovative solutions.
Yeah.
Basic income might not be the answer for everyone,
No.
but it's certainly a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe someday we'll look back and wonder why we ever thought it was anything other than common sense.
That's a thought-provoking way to end our deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been my pleasure. And to all of you listening out there, keep diving deep.